Well, once again, the Bible seems way too relevant for what's going on in the world, because the passage from James talks about how to talk to each other, having no ambition or envy. And this passage here talks about the disputes and who is the greatest. I don't know, I think this sermon sort of preaches itself. I could sit down right now and you could sort of get the whole thing. But then we have this list, and I don't want to talk so much about what Jesus says, but this list from James, which is in this one wonderful passage in the 17th verse of the third chapter of James, which says, "But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy." This is a list hidden deep in Scripture. You don't hear about this passage much, but it is a list about how to talk to each other. It's about wisdom, but the wisdom in this passage is in the context of debate, and it's in the context of people disagreeing with each other. And this is how then we disagree with each other. It's a great list. It's a list of these 8 words, and the Bible is full of lists. The Bible is the 10 Commandments, you've got the begats, you've got the 7 pillars of wisdom, you've got the Beatitudes, blessed are the, blessed are the, blessed are the. You have that list of love from 1 Corinthians, love is patient and kind, and the Bible loves lists. And each of these lists speaks to us in a different way, that third one, I can really relate to that third one. So I have before us in this passage that I'm going to take apart, James 3:17, there are 8 parts about how we should talk to each other. So I have an 8-point sermon this morning. Really. Hopefully they'll be short. So I want to talk about these 8 characteristics of wisdom in discourse, and because we're always, in dialogue with something or somebody. If you're married, you know how this goes. That there's always some sort of back and forth and some sort of, it could be as simple as, where are we going to eat dinner tonight? Which in my house is complicated because my wife is a vegetarian and I am really not. So what you eat dinner is, every day we have this sort of discourse. Or it could be do we buy a new car? Do we buy a house? Or there's always these decisions that are made in families. So there's this discourse, and usually where there's discourse, there's disagreement. And how we do this. Stacy preached a couple of weeks ago about the fact that we need to get used to the fact that we're going to disagree with each other. And here is the really core, wonderful, one of my favorite verses that talks about how we do this. And the positive characteristics of our discourse with one another. So I've got pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy, full of good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And here we go. How we talk to each other in the midst of differences. The first one is pure. And in this passage from James, before they get to the pure, the author of James, presumably James, says 2 times that the problem is that folks are envious and ambitious. And that this sort of pollutes the discourse. That there is envy in everything and ambition in everything that sort of makes every debate about what is true and being right about personal stuff. Much debate apparently has to do with our own need to win, to be right, to be powerful. Quite apart from the issues or the substance of the matter, apparently our ego is on the line a lot. Surprise! And that when we talk to each other, we try to be pure, that is, seek wisdom and not our own gain. So that's pure. We want our discourse to be about what's important, to be about principles, and not about our own envy or ambition. The second thing that's mentioned in this passage is peaceable. First pure, then peaceable, which is a funny word able to be peaceful, that I am going to consider the possibility that we could do this peaceably, that we don't have to fight about it. We don't have to be angry about it. We don't have to bring another person down, that there is the possibility that we can do this in a peaceable way. This word is also used, you probably are already thinking about this picture, this wonderful picture called The Peaceable Kingdom that was painted about 1833 by a guy named Edward Hicks. The Peaceable Kingdom, where the lion lies down with the lamb. And there are all these animals off to the right side. There's the lion and a leopard and a cow and a sheep. And the cow and the sheep, now they're really interesting. Go back and look at this picture when you come across it next time. The really interesting thing about this picture about the peaceable kingdom is that the sheep and the cows, they're just looking just fine. Their eyes are sort of droopy and they're at peace. And then you look at the lions and the leopards, and their eyes are huge and surrealistic, and they're these big sort of anime eyes in these animals, because they're the ones that have to change, of course. The lion is looking at the lamb and going, and so the lion's eyes are huge in the peaceable kingdom because he's the one that's called on to change. The lamb, not so much. Yeah, okay, as long as he's all right, I'm good. So to be peaceable, something about our aggressiveness needs to be challenged, and that will not be easy. Our eyes will be wide open, and we will wonder at every moment whether we can pull this off. Edward Hicks, the person who painted that, was a Quaker preacher in Bucks County, Pennsylvania in the early 1800s. And we remember the part of the picture that has the lion and the lamb and the small child. That's a part of the peaceable kingdom. But off to the left is William Penn signing a treaty with Native Americans. Off to the left is the understanding that there is this aggression, and then there is this other thing that has some of the same dimensions to it, this cultural confrontation. And that just like today, when cultures collide and you understand that one of them needs to be more peaceable. So, to talk to each other, to engage with each other, we need to be pure, we need to be able to be peaceful, peaceable, and we need to be gentle, that we need to speak the truth without drama or intrusion. Oh, I'm going to have trouble with this one. You see, because I like the big flashy truths. I like the truths that I can run around the sanctuary about. I like the truths that I can wave my hands about. I like the truths that I can pound on the pulpit about. I'm going to have trouble with this one. Because to really talk to each other, sometimes we have to whisper. To really change ourselves, sometimes we have to be gentle. So, to talk to each other, purity, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, willing to yield, willing to yield. And I think of this in traffic terms. You know, when someone that I'm competing with on Upper Union Street, right there, where he's supposed to turn left, but you know the guy in the SUV next to you is not going to turn left, and you sort of have to yield to that person in the lane business, right there at Balltown Road. And if when I'm in a good Christian frame of mind, I yield, so as we both don't kill ourselves. But when I'm not in such a good frame of mind, so well, I'm going to go faster, and you're in the wrong lane, and I'm right. And I'm not going to yield because I'm right. Willing to yield. when I was in high school, I'm not exactly sure who put out this commercial, but there was a traffic commercial back when they did public service announcements more, and it was it was about traffic, and it was, "Don't be dead right." You remember that? Don't be dead right. And I think about that commercial when I'm next to the SUV that's being extra obnoxious. And I know I'm in the right lane. And you know, in the church, it's easy to imagine that we're in the right lane, that we're in the correct place, and that the people are doing that other stuff are just rotten. And that they ought to yield to us because we clearly have the moral position in hand. We are clearly in the right place. And why they don't recognize this is beyond us. The challenge is to yield, willing to yield, even in the face of knowing that you are right. That's an extension of gentleness that is hard to pull off. Willing to yield, being able to yield. The fifth one, full of mercy. Mercy is a kind of forgiveness, a kind of generous forgiveness that God has to us. But we can be merciful. Blessed are the merciful. And I think what this means is a kind of a willingness to forgive people for thinking that they're right. That we've talked about willingness to yield, and it comes to a point that after the argument that we possibly have allowed them to win, or whatever that means, that we have to forgive them. We have to be merciful to their being either right or wrong. Again, a challenge. We have to be willing to forgive people who think that they are right. Merciful. And God must have this same sort of mercy on us because we have this incredibly narrow view of the time we were born in and the culture that we were born in and our particular understanding of gravity and our particular understanding of political affiliations and economics. And we have this very narrow view, and then infinite God knows exactly how wrong we are about all these things. Even in context we may be wrong. And God is merciful to us. God forgives us even when we are completely and utterly wrong, which I suspect is most of the time. Full of mercy. The sixth one in this list, we're getting close to the end. I number these so that you can keep track of how close we are to the end of the sermon. But the sixth one is being full of good fruits. And good fruits is what comes at the end of it. You know, if you have a debate with somebody and at the end of it, you shake hands and you say, "We advanced our understanding of this. At the end of this talk, we felt better about this. We came to a new conclusion. We came to a new understanding. There was a feeling of consensus in the room. And after this debate, we celebrated the fact, and no one lost any sleep about it afterwards. And it was all good, you know." And that would be the good fruits of a discussion. And that doesn't happen much. But sometimes it does, you know. Sometimes you go to a meeting and somebody says X and somebody says Y, and they both talk about it, and pretty soon they both say, "Well, you're right. It's Z." And when people change their minds, it is a miracle. And then when you get to Z, then you can collaborate on how to make that happen, and the world can change. When people change, the world can change. But it takes an understanding of what's going to come from this. Is it just going to be who votes for me, or is it going to be how the world changes? We have to be attentive to the fruits of all of our discussion. Number 7, without partiality. Now, we talked earlier, number 1, about purity and envy and ambition. The partiality are the people that we like. It would be important for us to understand that seeking truth in any sort of discussion is not just about us and our ego that's on the line, but even people we love. It's not all about us. It's not all about our friends. It's not all about our culture. And that would be what partiality is, that we're partial to our understanding. We're partial to the folks that agree with us. And so we're going to help only them. And wisdom understands that the extension of it's not all about us is that it's not all about our worldview either. A radical humility that moves out even from ourselves to affect the people around us. If you're keeping track of this, we're on number 8, and it is the hardest of all. Without partiality, James writes, or hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. That is, that we do what we say, that if we say we stand for this, that we do it, and we almost never do. We come here and we have a prayer of confession that starts every church service because we are all hypocrites, seeking transformation. All of us have failed to follow Jesus Christ in the last week. Some in small ways, some in large ways. All of us are broken. All of us are hypocrites. And we come here only through the mercy of God to understand that God forgives us and that there is a new possibility in the next minute, in the next day. So it is the most challenging of all of these. Even after all of this happens, even after we look at purity, peaceable, and gentle, and willing to yield, full of mercy, full of good fruits, without partiality, and then we get to the point where we have to act all this out. Okay, I've agreed to the first 7, now I have to do them all. If we were by ourselves, we couldn't do it. If we were alone, it would be impossible. But we're not alone. We have each other, and we have a loving God that supports us, that is there in the middle of the night when we call God's name. We have a loving God that gives us a power to be greater than our frailties. We have a God that can put us so close that in the instant of the thinking and the saying, God can be called upon. In the New Testament, the church is really worried about how people talk to each other. In all of the lists that Paul gives out about the real sins, there's always something about slander and maliciousness, and there's always something about how we talk gets into Paul's lists. Because apparently the early church was popular. There's all sorts of things happening. People were disagreeing with each other. There was councils to figure out what was true. People were getting burned at the stake. It was a really hotbed of dispute. And over again, people are saying we've got to learn how to talk to each other differently. And so there is that moment when you're talking to your spouse or your child or your parent in which you want to say something that makes it clear that you're right. It's that microsecond, it's that breath where you inhale in order to say the thing. That I'd like for all of us to consider that inhalation is the Spirit of God. And that we shall be pure. And that we shall try with every part of us, with God's help, to be peaceable and gentle and willing to yield and full of mercy, and full of good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. It's tough. But we will do this together. And with God's help and mercy, every once in a while, we will do it right. In the name of the forgiving God.